Tonight, on A Conversation with Brian, we have Dr. Tina Boogren. Tina Boogren is a fierce advocate for educators and an award-winning educator, best-selling author, and highly sought-after speaker. She has proudly served as classroom teacher, mentor, instructional coach, and building level leader, and has presented for audiences all around the world. Tina has written numerous books, including her newest one, Educator Wellness, a guide for sustaining physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being, as she co-authored this book with Dr. Tim Kanold. She is also a contributing author of the newest Solution Tree book, Women Who Lead: Insights, Inspiration, and Guidance to Grow as an Educator. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome to A Conversation with Brian, Dr. Tina Boogren. Tina, welcome to A Conversation with Brian.
I'm so excited. This feels like a long time coming, so I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
You know, it's funny because the last time we were on a Zoom together was with you, me, and Tim Kanold. And I don't know if you remember.
Oh, I do.
You know what's coming, right? The water. Yes, yes.
Water.
You know, I went for a bike ride today, and then I went and worked out. And I said, I got to drink my water. I got to make sure I'm hydrated because I don't want the same thing that happened to me that happened before, because I caught this huge cramp and I was down for the count and I got back up and you and Tim were laughing at me. So I wanted to make sure it was okay.
It was like you were there and then you were
Boom.
gone. We thought we had bored you to death.
Oh man, that was pretty funny. Well, again, thanks for joining me. Tina, on each one of my shows, I ask my guests to really talk as much as you like about your personal story and your professional journey. And so, who is Tina Boogren?
Yeah. First of all, I love your podcast. So this feels so fun to be on this side of it. So my background, my educational background, I started as well, I'm actually going to back up, and before I even get there, I started at the University of Iowa. I was an English major. I wanted to be a writer. And senior year of college, I had the panic moment of, oh my gosh, I have this English degree, but I don't know what that job is. And so the very last semester, I decided to hook on to get a secondary teaching license. I decided to high school English teacher. I would just have this as kind of a backup.
Right.
And of course, I've done nothing else. So I fell into it and loved it. And the funny part was when I decided to move towards education, everyone in my life was like, finally, she figured it out. I mean, unbeknownst to me, everyone else knew I should have been a teacher. I taught my stuffed animals. I taught tennis lessons. I was always signing up to do mentoring. Like, I'm kind of a born teacher, but I don't come from a family of teachers. So I guess I just hadn't pursued that. And now it's like, I can't imagine doing anything else. So I got my secondary teaching license and was able to finagle my way to student teach out here in Colorado, which is what got me out here. And I got placed, I wanted to be a high school English teacher, and I got placed for my student teaching at the middle school level. And I cried. I was like, oh God, I hated middle school. I don't want to go back. And then I never left. I fell in love with it. So most of my experience was at the middle school level. I was a teacher. Then I got to be an instructional coach, which I absolutely loved. Specifically, I got to work with new teachers, which was fantastic. I spent a year as an assistant principal at the middle school level, which I learned a lot. I always say my gray hair started there, but those are my best stories. And then,
Sure.
gosh, it's been over 12 years now, which is just crazy to me that I have worked starting on the Marzano resources side of the house and now feed on both sides between Marzano and Solution Tree, kind of finding my footing. I started out doing all of my work was representing Dr. Marzano's exquisite work around instruction. And then just, it kept kind of tweaking from there of that instructional piece through the lens of new teachers. And then how do we support new teachers? And then how do we, I wrote a book specifically thinking about it, written towards the audience of new teachers themselves. And then through all of it, there's just been this little kind of scratch of, it's the theme that's come up in every single book of all of this work, all of the instructional pieces rest on having a well, a
Sure.
WELL, a
Yeah.
well human delivering that. And I've been on this crusade, if you will, of self-care or wellness, whatever term we want to utilize, for a
Yeah.
long time. And then COVID just blew it all up
Yeah.
even more so. Yeah,
So, when we talk about your professional journey, there's got to be a personal piece to that, right? And
for
so you
sure.
talked about you were kind of led to be a teacher. I mean, everything that you did, although you didn't think about it,
Right.
somebody had to tell
Yep.
you. Like, so who were those people who influenced you?
Yeah, I had amazing teachers. I had amazing teachers.
Yeah.
I distinctly, my very first book, Supporting Beginning Teachers, like the dedication is to those specific teachers that I remember. I mean, way back to, and this loops into why I was an English teacher in college. So my third grade teacher, Carol Gormans, was a writer. Like, she wrote books, and I remember like,
Wow.
and she was the one that said to me, "You are an amazing writer." And so I had in my head this whole time of wanting to be a writer, and had, like I said, I had amazing teachers, but I hadn't thought. Here's the interesting part: the job I have now, conducting workshops and keynotes, I was not a leader in that traditional sense. I hated giving speeches. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was not the kid that was told to be quiet in class. I was the one that the teacher said she should speak up
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So it's this crazy turn in life, but um, lots of really incredible teachers leading the way, and a super supportive family and parents that pursue, go be a writer,
Sure.
go follow that piece, and no push of like, what are you going to do with your English degree? It was
Yeah.
my realization of like, I don't know what that job looks like. Yeah,
Well, it was in the cards for you. I mean,
I think so.
being a
With
writer, I mean,
Bill,
you've written how many books? I mean, it's just amazing. And
yeah,
in this
yeah,
newest book, this is a great segue. This newest book, Educator Wellness, who you wrote with my great friend Tim Kanold.
yeah.
It
Look at that
really,
book. That
yeah.
is
You
like
know what?
so beautiful.
And I was digging into it, and I really felt like um, a lot of what you and Tim wrote, I have experienced. And one of
Yeah,
the things that I really was impressed with, Tina, is your vulnerability.
oh,
After each one of those dimensions in your book, you have four dimensions, and we'll get into that. You all talk about your stories, and you really
yeah,
are vulnerable. I mean, it's really
yeah.
like, wow, if they can be vulnerable, then we don't have to be perfect, right?
Oh, thank you. That was one of the fastest connections that Tim and I made together, was that belief and willingness of, whenever I talk about wellness, I always say I am not shouting from a mountain like I have this
Yeah.
figured out. I walk beside you of, gosh, I have a sticky note right here on my desk that says, teach what you most need to learn. And I live by that. Like, I really, the wellness piece, going back to the personality side too, when I started this job in particular, I've had moments of it, as we all had, of touching burnout, right? When
Yeah.
things get hard.
Yeah.
This job, as you know, the travel really got to me, and
Sure.
I said yes to everything.
Same thing.
And I got in over my head, and I pretended that everything was fine, and it was not. I was not taking care of myself. And so I hit a real crash of like, something has to change. And the irony was that when I hit that moment was when I was co-authoring the book, Motivating and Inspiring Students. You know how the universe
Sure.
tends to give us signals,
Yeah.
right? And that book, we utilized Maslow's hierarchy. I co-authored it with Dr. Marzano, where we were talking about all the strategies, social emotional learning strategies for
Yeah.
students. And it was the aha of, I'm not doing this for myself, right? So I started at the bottom of starting with the physiological wellness. And it's why we start in our book, the first dimension is physical wellness. Because if we don't feel good, we don't show up as our best selves.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go through your book, because I
Yeah.
really want people to kind of
Show me what's on your sticky notes.
get a wellness. I mean, get a window into your book. On my first sticky note, I have Brian. This is you. And
Oh,
then I
I
have some
gotta know.
other sticky notes where I have Brian. This is definitely you, Brian. You need to work on this, Brian. You have, as you all say, ebbed and flowed. And
Yeah.
so let's talk about the four dimensions, and I like it because in each dimension you have three routines that
Mhm.
you talk about that we can work on. And I think it just, one, it's an easy read, but two, it really helps you to reflect and really dig deep into yourself. In those first three dimensions, as you and Tim talk about, it's about self. We got
Yeah.
to get those right, because the fourth dimension, the social one, really is about that relationships. For what we ultimately are trying to do is to make
Yeah.
sure that we are well for these students.
Yep.
So let's start with the physical dimension. You talk about food, movement, and sleep. Talk about those and why those are so important. It
Yeah.
sounds like a duh, like we should know that,
I know.
but it's
I know.
not.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, whenever I do workshops and talk with teachers, I always, and educators in general, I always say, we know these.
Yeah,
The one that's interesting, or the piece that Tim and I were really thoughtful about, is instead of saying diet, exercise, and sleep, we specifically say food routines, movement routines, and sleep routines, because
yeah,
we're not talking about shame, right? This
sure.
is not about going a specific diet. Or what we really tie this to, that opening part of that chapter says, when we feel better, we are better.
Yeah,
And so it's literally self-care in the truest form. Are we eating? Are we nourishing ourselves? Are we staying hydrated? Are we drinking the stupid water?
yeah,
Movement, not as a punishment for something we ate, but to honor ourselves and do what feels good. And then that sleep and rest part. So this is the one that's tricky, because like we look at the dimensions, and all of us, at self-reflection, many of us start here at physical wellness and go, oh God, I have a lot to work on, right? And
yeah,
it's not about that. It's the recognition of, number one, that we're worthy of working on those things, and that when we do take care of ourselves at this most basic level, it absolutely, I can draw a line to student achievement, right? Like,
yeah,
because I know if I am not sleeping, let's take sleep, right? If I am not getting enough sleep, I interact with people differently, particularly students. I have quicker, that's when we start getting into those like quick reactions rather
sure.
than responses.
Yeah.
So yes, that most essential level.
And in your book, you say sleep, but it's not just sleep, because you
Not
talk
just
about
sleep,
rest
yeah.
as well.
Yes, and what a crazy concept to think about, resting through the day. We talk about it in a 24-hour cycle.
Yeah,
I don't think we allow ourselves time for rest. And by rest, we mean, I mean, ideally everyone's like, does this mean I get to take a nap? Like,
right.
probably not during our day, but we can pause for a second and take a couple deep breaths of, like,
Sure.
with the rat race, the running all the time, how do we find moments of calm during the day? And just to kind of reset ourselves.
Yeah. You know, the that piece is really important. I often think about just, and you talk about this a little bit in the book, the number of things that are on teachers' plates. And you
Yeah.
talk about the decisions,
Decision.
like 30 some thousand decisions or
Yeah.
something crazy like that. And so that the stress level becomes, at times, it affects that first part,
Yes.
the physical piece, because I have to be honest. There were times during this pandemic and times in my life before when I've dealt with challenging mental health issues, that
Yep.
when that stress comes, that's when I want to eat more. That's when I
Agreed.
don't want to
I
exercise,
I
right?
certainly
So
don't want to
how do you
exercise.
help teachers understand to help them realize that all the things that that's coming at them, they have to be able to manage that in a way that's going to allow them to have some balance.
Agree. Could not agree more. And that is, you're so spot on in those four dimensions. They just loop back
Yeah,
and forth, in and out of each other. You mentioned in the second dimension, that mental wellness, the first piece of that are those decision making routines, and
yeah,
that's the recognition of 35,000 decisions,
it's amazing.
1,500 educational decisions. So what we recommend for that is being able to automate and regulate some of those habits,
Right.
and which loops us back to, if we can regulate and automate like food routines, so that I found research that said we make 226.7 decisions about food each day. And when I first heard that, I'm like, no way. And then I thought about it more, and I'm like, nope, I think about food all day long. That's
Yeah.
probably right? But
Yeah.
if we have this finite number of good decisions we can make, let's not waste 226 of them on food. So if we loop back to physical wellness, can we plan our lunch the night before? And this is where it's tricky because different strategies work for different people. So for me, I basically eat the same breakfast and lunch every single day. That doesn't bother me. But that for other people, that's not a good idea. But so then they have to find, what are those small little pieces for movement. A commitment that I made a few years ago was rather than saying, I used to say exercise, and I'd be like, I'm going to work out 4 days a week. So Monday would roll around. I'm certainly not working out on Monday because I got 6 days left,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But it would become this, think of how many choices and decisions I was making. Yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah.
Where now my commitment is I move my body every day.
Yeah.
That could be some sort of formal workout. It could be a walk. It could be whatever it is. So I'm removing the decision. So I'm trying to get back that brain power to save that decision making for students, for instruction,
Yeah.
for those important pieces.
What I also think it does is it takes away the pressure because, sometimes people feel like they have to do a certain exercise to be able to say, oh, I exercise. If you
Right.
can just get out and walk for 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and then get out and walk for 10 minutes, you're
Yeah.
moving, right?
Moving, and to think of the movement as, again, not a punishment for something we ate, but for loving our body. I think this. I call my walks AAWs, which is attitude adjustment walk, right?
Yeah.
My walks are way more for my own mental health and
Sure.
well-being than for exercise. Yeah.
And we'll jump into some of the other dimensions in a few seconds. But one of the things that you have kind of distinguished in your book, and I listened to some of your podcasts recently, is this idea of the difference between wellness and self-care. Like just because self-care has gotten to that term has gotten to mean for me like an event, and it's
Agreed.
not an event, right?
Yes. I could not agree more. In fact, I cringe now when I hear it because it's been kind of twisted.
Yeah.
So I was talking about self-care, pre-pandemic, and tried to define it as the most basic sense of the word of caring for ourselves, right? And it has turned into, exactly as you said, an event.
Yeah.
I've called it sometimes like consumer self-care. It's being advertised to us. If you buy this, no, we shouldn't have to buy
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
And it's another thing for so many of us. And I would venture to say women in particular, it's another thing to feel guilty about. Like, it's another thing on the list that I can't get to. And that is the exact opposite. So I've shifted to, I still believe in my definition of self-care, of just thinking about different choices that we make. All of these pieces would be considered self-care, but I've
Sure.
shifted to using the term wellness because it sits differently these
Yeah.
days. Well-being, I'm hearing a lot. There's a lot of talk now about moving beyond self-care. And I would agree with that, but I would also say that definition is also how I define self-care. So it's all
Sure.
in precision around definitions,
Yeah.
but I could not agree more. It's not an event. It's not if we think of self-care as, vacations and eating chocolate and wine, all of which I am for, right? Then that doesn't help us go to work on Monday. Like I talk about these two different types of self-care. There's that true indulgence piece of it. And there's a place for that. My goodness, we need that. But, Tim and I's mantra in the Educator Wellness is the LYBL, live your best life, which means what does it look like to live your best life on a Tuesday in January at school, right? Like, because if we just wait to live our best lives on vacation or when we retire or when our kids grow up, we are missing all those beautiful moments, and especially those moments with students.
Yeah. So let's go to the mental piece.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more. Just when we talk about efficacy, can you talk about what do you mean by that? Because I think sometimes people are not clear on that term, and how do you use that in the context of wellness?
Yeah. So this is where we start really thinking about, this is a lot of Dr. Kristen Neff's work around that self-compassion piece,
Yeah.
where gosh, we just speak kindly to ourselves. I often talk about this in terms of that voice inside our heads.
Yeah.
For many of us, that voice is so much more of an inner critic than an inner friend. Kristen Neff would describe it as if we're saying things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to someone that we love, to stop saying that to ourselves. This is that just how we speak to ourselves
Sure.
really matters. And this kind of pulls in that growth mindset piece of how that willingness to believe that we can get better, we can do this, that we have the tools and the skills to be able to get a little bit better, helps us. And when we track our progress, that speaks to that efficacy piece, that making progress just a little bit at a time is essential.
It's a challenge for educators, and I
Yes.
think educators, just in my travels, are as harder on themselves as any people,
Yes.
and we don't toot our own horns. One,
No.
we don't, but we also tend, and I put myself in this category, we tend to hear the 1% of the noise that's negative as
Yes.
opposed to the 99% that's positive,
Yep.
and we blow the 1% up as if it
Yes.
was 99%.
Yep. Yep. And that is just human nature, right? I always share, like, we get evaluations for our job, right? And
Yep.
we'll have 200 people fill out an evaluation, and that one comment that just
When
deflates
Oh
us,
yeah,
right?
sticks in your head, right? You're like,
Yes,
wow,
forever. We can
great,
still
yeah,
mention the one comment that we got, but we can't mention all the good ones, right?
yeah,
That piece is
yeah.
huge. Yes.
And so the
Mhm.
other dimension, the emotional dimension, and you have three routines: awareness, understanding, and mindfulness. Let's kind of walk through those, in terms of awareness. And again, they sound self-explanatory, but
I know.
but there's something that you have to be strategic and
Yeah.
purposeful to make sure that
Yeah.
you're incorporating those into your lives.
Yeah. And this dimension is the interesting one, where these routines go in order. So the awareness to the understanding to the mindfulness. So we say step one is you have to be aware of your emotions. This is the area that I'm actually working on the most. I hate this area. I am I am not, I'm an Enneagram 3. If anyone knows the Enneagram, I do not like emotions. I don't have time for them. Like, I just, right.
Well,
Just shove
in
them down,
in your story, it says you stuff them. You
stuff them down,
yeah.
right? I got work to do. I don't have time for that. So I
Yeah.
am working on this one. But so first of all, it is that awareness. And to me, a lot of this is a mind body connection of, like, how am I feeling in this moment? Like, what are those emotions? We wrote the book right before it got published, right before Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart came out.
Mhm.
So I'm incorporating that into the workshop. It doesn't show up in the book, but it's identifying there's so many emotions that we never think about.
Yeah.
Most people, you would say the emotions are happy, sad, and mad,
Yeah.
but there's a whole spectrum of them. And we
Right.
pulled a lot of Mark Brackett's work from Permission to Feel, of identifying in this moment, how am I feeling? So first, just an awareness,
Yeah.
which goes back to rest. We have to slow down long enough to be able to identify that. So during the day, the pause of, like, in this moment, how am I feeling?
Yeah.
And then tracing those emotions back to understanding where they're coming from. And that's a hard thing to do, of, like,
It is.
gosh, and there's the emotions get so tricky of, like, I feel like I'm mad, but am I mad, or am I embarrassed by something that happened earlier?
Yeah.
Or am I really just frustrated, or my feelings are hurt, or I'm actually sad, but it's showing up as mad? Because there's only so many ways we can show
Yeah.
emotions. The perfect example I always say is, I have a tendency, when I am mad, it shows up as tears. So then people think I'm sad and they feel sorry for me, and it just makes me more mad because I'm actually angry.
Yeah.
But it comes out as tears.
Yeah.
So being aware of those, understanding those. And then the third piece of that mindfulness means, not recognizing emotions are not good or bad. It's how we respond to them. And that pause, this is where we talk about that difference between a reaction and a response to emotions. Ideally, we would like to have a thoughtful response rather than a quick reaction. Quick
Yeah.
reactions are what tend to get us in trouble. That's our quick
Sure.
flippant comment, or
Yep.
something that we do that we end up regretting. We've all been there
Yeah.
before, but it's all seeped up in emotions. And I say this emotional awareness piece, I think, is so huge right now. We know teachers have said last year that they've seen student behavior that they've never seen before. And one of the out of control behavior, and something that I've had conversations with, is it makes perfect sense to me that student behavior is out of control because adult behavior is out of control. And I don't mean educators, I mean adults, right? And the reason one of the reasons adult behavior is out of control is because everyone is feeling anxious.
Yeah.
We know that in order to feel safe, we need order, predictability, and fairness. And that's kind of what COVID removed for us. And so when we don't feel safe, the emotion that's tied to that is anxiety. So the whole world is feeling anxious. And when we're anxious, we are not our best selves. This is when I mean, you and I have seen it, the airport behavior. I've been traveling for 12
Yeah.
years, and what I've seen in the
Yeah.
past year is unlike anything I've ever seen, similar to students in the classroom. So that emotional wellness piece is huge. And this is where the adults, like as educators, we have got to be aware of our emotions and understand where they come from, because that piece in the classroom translates like the mirror neurons we feed off of each other's emotions. This one's a doozy. Yeah.
You know, again, in your book, you talk about this, idea of stress and again, anxiety, and in itself, stress is not a bad thing, but
No.
prolonged stress,
Yeah,
and
that's the
that's what
bad
we've
thing.
been under, prolonged stress, and that changes your
Yes.
brain.
Yes. Yes.
You
Do you
know?
remember this is I can't believe I'm about to say this. This was about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. There was, I believe it was a New York Times article. The title of the article was "Your Surge Capacity is Depleted. It's Why You Feel So Awful."
Yeah.
And it was at the start of COVID, about 6 months into it,
Yeah.
of the idea that we can handle a crisis. This is like when a traumatic event occurs, we somehow are able to dig in and get through it. And then it's done. And afterwards we look back and think, my God, how was I able to do that?
Yeah.
So we're able to do it that short term, but our brains were not set
No.
up for this. We're 3 years into
Yeah.
it, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, again, you're like, your circuit breaker just shuts off,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
um, the social dimension, in those three routines: relationships, trust, and purpose. Again, the first three really are
yeah,
about ourselves,
yeah,
but then the last one is really about how we influence and affect others, right?
yeah,
And so talk about again that relationship, that the trust, because building trust is huge, right? And
yeah.
I like in your story. I'm not going to tell you. Well, sorry, it's a bug. Sorry. I like in your social story that you tell about this idea of how you build trust. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and exactly as you said, we move from those first three routines it's all that personal work that no one can do that for us. And that is like, those dimensions are just, that's really, if you want to think about that self-care and then that shift, that social wellness piece, it's a shift from self-care to that kind of collective care.
Right.
And this is, Tim coined this phrase, and I use it all the time, which I love, is, we have a social sector profession. We don't show up and work in a cubicle. We work with others. And the majority of us work with small people, kids. So the relationship piece and the colleagues, like, we are just how we interact with each other. And we know right now in particular, we're all very worried about attrition and attracting new teachers. And one of the things for certain is there has to be a sense of belonging. In fact, teachers are much more likely to stay if they have a true friend at work.
Yeah.
So how are we building those relationships, those social connections? In order to do that, we need the trust. And this is where we talk about the which comes first, trust or vulnerability. And like we like to have that discussion. The reality is the vulnerability comes first. When you're willing to be vulnerable, then you're much more likely, you just get to that deeper level of that connection and relationship, that true sense of belonging. And gosh, just groups that I work with that are hanging through these past few years, the ones that truly feel like they're going to stay and they're going to make it to the other side. When I ask why, what is the difference? What is going on there? They have a team that they've weathered this together. In
Sure.
fact, as hard as it's been with students, they are closer with those students, particularly that first group of students that they went
Sure.
through. Like saying goodbye to them was so hard because those relationships, and they built that trust over
Yeah.
time, has been essential. And then the final routine of purpose, this is reconnecting to our why. And I think a lot of us this is not a blame. This is just a fact. Lost our why over these last few years. The job is so hard. And what we know is when we lose our why, that's one of the first indications of burnout. One of my recommendations for schools and staff and individual teachers has been to spend some time before the next school year starts and remind yourself of your why.
Yeah.
Like, it maybe has been a little while since you've thought about it, and maybe your why has changed since COVID. We've learned a lot. Like, life kind of
Sure.
settled out in different
Yeah.
ways.
I also heard on you and Tim talking about, and this is the other thing that's great, great, great about your book. You have these little videos that
Yeah, the
you
QR
just,
codes. Thank
yes, you
you.
can just actually put your phone up and pop
Yes.
those QR codes videos up, and they are wonderful. They really are great professional learning opportunities for teams and staff. They're very short, and I love
Yay.
those.
Thank
And I
you.
think I lost my train of thought, but one of the things that I think I heard you say when talking with Tim in that idea of trust is this idea of deep listening.
Yeah.
And Tim gave you a compliment. He said, Tina, you're a great deep listener. And you're like, no, I'm an interrupter. I got to
I
work
am an
on this.
interrupter.
So talk a little bit about that, because I'm an interrupter. Like my co-principal partner and one of my co-authors of my book, Diane Kerr, she's the most exquisite, deep listener. I mean, you always feel like you're the only person in the
Yeah.
room, and I'm the person who is like looking at my phone and interrupting because I want to tell my story. And so, talk a little bit about how you worked on that.
God, it is a constant work in progress. Yes, it is, it's an excitement piece when I'm talking with someone else but gosh, when you have someone that is a really good listener, it reminds you of what a gift that is. Like that example of Diane, like what a huge, it's just such a gift. And when I feel it, I always think, gosh, I just want to give that gift to someone else. So it is something that I have to if it is not a conscious decision, that's when I move into interrupter mode. So I have to, it's not about me. It's about listening to honoring someone else and thinking of that as a gift. And that's how you build trust and you build those deep relationships. And it is an ongoing practice. I do a lot of coaching workshops and we do some activities around this.
Sure.
And so many people have this aha of like, and in this day and age with
Yeah.
phones and watches buzzing and everything else, like it's become kind of a lost art.
Yeah. The thing I love about your book, and I love about you and Tim, again, is your vulnerability and your willingness to share the ebbs and flows of your journey. Because
Yeah.
we all have ebbs and flows, and it's not about judgment, and it's not about you did this wrong. It's about, okay, I may have taken a step back. Okay, what do I need to do now to make sure I get back onto
Yeah.
my wellness journey? Because it really, truly is first about you, but
Yeah.
ultimately, when we're talking about school, it's
Yeah.
about how do we make sure that we're focused on student achievement.
Yep. Ultimately. And that connection to student achievement just cannot be overstated, right? The what I always say is, we know that the most direct correlation to student achievement is the teacher in the classroom. We've known that forever. Gobs and gobs of research supporting that. You wouldn't, we always say, I always say research is tricky because you can find two sides, right? If you want to
Right.
find research that supports homework, you'll find it. You want to find research that goes against it, you'll find it. But that statement, that's just woof, that is,
Yeah.
we know that to be true. The most direct correlation is the teacher. What I think though, where we goofed is that we took that to mean just instruction,
Right.
right? The teacher. So we
Yeah.
focus, which my goodness, of course we need to do that. We need to be talking
Yeah.
about instruction, but I don't care how good the strategy is. John Hattie can have a huge effect size. Bob Marzano can hand
Yeah.
it to us on a silver platter. If the person providing that strategy is totally depleted and worn out,
Yeah.
it's never going to have the effect size on students that we're looking for. And we can find, there is data that and research that shows that the teacher's emotional state is as important as instructional strategies.
Yeah.
So I always say to people, teachers are the most caring group, right? Teachers and nurses, like such caregivers. So it's
Yeah.
hard sometimes for teachers to think about, educators to think about taking care of themselves. And I always say, well, then do it through the lens of taking care of your students,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
An experiment that I offer is or a question is to ask educators, like when they think about their own children or nieces, nephews, right? And they think about sending them to school and they picture that ideal teacher for their child. I always say, list what are those qualities? And they'll say someone who's passionate and excited and loves their job and, has high energy. And
Sure.
so how do we make sure that we give that same gift? And we define educator wellness as an active process. It's constant. It's just like teaching. There is no perfect teacher, right? There is no perfect, we're not going to be balanced in all four of these all the time. Instead, it's why we have the language of consider, and we invite readers to write their own story of like
Love that. Yeah.
highlighting where are you shining, and then where that recognition that all four areas really are, they're all essential. So we can't just focus on one, but
Right.
it helps with that self-reflection piece of where do I have some celebrations and where do I know I need to spend some time? Like I said, right now, I'm really trying to dig into that emotional wellness piece of it, to not just ignore the emotions, but to be aware of them, understand where they come from, employ mindfulness strategies.
And that's what helps. That's what your book helps do, because in terms of the reflection piece, when you can write at the end of the chapter, you have some questions for the reader. I really think it helps people really focus on some areas that they need to really work on a little bit more, because we tend to gravitate towards the areas where we're strong or we're doing
Yeah, that's
okay.
way more fun,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think having them write and reflect, it really points a light and says, okay, I need to reflect on this. I need to actually do something about it. I need to make sure that I'm purposeful about it, because
Yeah.
that's the only way I'm going to get better. And it really is a never-ending journey of
Right.
continuous improvement, right?
Yep. Yep. Agree. And that's why we have in the back all those appendices to take them or leave them. We always say different personalities,
Yeah.
different strategies work, but some self-assessments and goal setting and ways that you can even set goals and think about tracking your progress along the way, if that's helpful. But yes, all those. And here, Tim and I have this vision of working with schools where teachers not only at the start of the year create a student achievement goal, but they create their own wellness goal,
Yeah.
right? So that they are, when we think about a professional growth plan, there's no reason that wellness should not be part of that professional growth. And we kind of, our hope is that we provided a framework and language to be able to do that. And like a common way for an entire staff could work on this together. Someone at a workshop, I hadn't even thought of this. She had said, gosh, there's 12 routines. You could focus on one routine a month.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, and you said it earlier, I mean, we have to be well in order for students to achieve. And so
Yep.
we can create a student achievement goal and our wellness goal, and we can probably actually correlate how they are, if my wellness is moving forward, let's look at my student achievement or
Yeah.
our student achievement.
Yeah.
You just never know, like, how that's that, putting that in front of teachers may help them actually, focus on it a little bit more.
Agree. That's the hope for sure.
Yeah. This has been great, Tina. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
So before we go, tell me about if I went to a Tina Boogren workshop, um, you know, and I sat there and I was like, okay, fix me.
I
Not
would run
fix,
and say, you do not need to be
no,
fixed.
but what would it look like if I attended one of your workshops?
Yeah. So it's a lot of this kind of discussion and honoring. So
Yeah.
my goal is always to help teachers, educators in general, recognize what they already are doing. Let's validate that. Let's highlight that. Like, let's celebrate that. Because there is no one that I have worked with that does not have some
Of
celebrations,
course.
right? So it's highlighting that. And also, what I love to do at workshops when you get multiple people together in a room is swapping ideas.
Yeah.
I think one of the most frustrating parts about wellness is that different strategies work for different people. There is no guarantee. And something that we tend to do as humans is, something will work for my best friend, so I will decide to do that. And then we feel like we're failing if that doesn't work for us. But the truth is, that's the whole personality piece of
Yeah.
it. So it's swapping ideas and strategies, empowering people to share. As you know, in the book is kind of a pretty generalized guideline. We don't go too specific into strategies. That's
Right.
what's really fun during a workshop of like, what do we know? What are strategies that work around, exercise? What are things that you do to incorporate more movement throughout your day? What does that
Sure.
look like? Sharing those ideas. In fact, so Tim and I are doing, coming up in the fall, we have 2 events, an event in Plano, and an event in Westminster, Colorado, that are wellness events. They're 2.5-day institutes where we do a deep dive with our colleagues, Jasmine Klar and Regina Owens, where we
Right.
dig into every single one of these routines. And the hope is that, again, validate what we're doing and walk away with a plan. So it's one thing to talk about it, get excited in a workshop, but then what happens when you go back to your life and the kids still need to be fed,
Yeah.
groceries still need to be bought? Like,
Well,
how do we go from what I always say, going from inspiration to action? How do we put it into place?
man, I love that you walk away with a plan, because a lot of times you go to a workshop and, the best intentions,
Absolutely.
are, I'm going to get to this, but once you leave that workshop
Ah,
or that professional learning event, then the world happens again, life happens again. There's so many things are coming at you. So if you have a plan, at least you have something on paper. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm committing to do.
wow. And we both Tim and I reference all the time the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and the notion of just getting 1% better,
Yeah.
right? These teeny
Yeah.
tiny little baby steps,
Yep.
right? Yes.
Yep. And
Yes.
celebrating, as you said over and over,
Yeah.
celebrating those things.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
heard again on one of your podcasts, or one of the interviews that you had with Tim, or somebody else. I can't remember who it was, but it was recent, that you said that we should look back at last year, the teachers should, or educators should, and make sure we make kind of a list of the successes, the celebrations, that because we need to make sure that we really understand how many things we do right.
Yes. My recommendation was to write a ta-da
Yeah,
list.
that's what it
Right?
was. Yeah.
We all know what a to-do list is, but a
Yeah.
ta-da, like to celebrate, because what our brains do is just, again, we mentioned this before, that under efficacy, it just points out all the things that were hard and didn't go the way as we wanted to, and we miss all the amazing pieces. So maybe writing a to-do list before you get started in the new school year, and that will help you find that purpose once again. But like, instead of just saying it was a wash, or it was just, oh, I want to forget about it. No, let's not forget about it. There's so many things to celebrate. What are those celebrations?
Yeah. Well, Tina, I do appreciate you.
Oh,
I don't know
not
if
as
you
much as I
remember.
appreciate you.
You might not remember this, but it was about 3 or 4, maybe 4 years ago. And I was flying into Denver, and I texted you, because we still have not met in
We
purpose,
have never
in
met in
person.
person. I
And,
know.
I texted you, and I was hoping that we could just get a glimpse and say hi,
Yes.
but we weren't able to. And then the next time it was actually on the Zoom with Tim, is when
Yes.
we actually had a chance to chat. But I feel
Yes.
like I've known you for a long
I
time,
could not agree more.
and
So
I
one
follow
of these
you. Yeah,
times,
exactly. And I follow you on everything, and I just
you as
think that
well.
you are just an amazing educator, an amazing person who influences so many people. And I say this at the end of all of my podcasts. My dad passed away a couple of years ago, and and at his funeral, I said this old African proverb: "As I go, I am wearing you." And as you are wearing a lot of the people who influenced you to get into the profession, and I'm wearing a ton of people as well. After all my podcasts, I feel so blessed and honored to be now wearing Tina Boogren.
Right back at you. Right back at you. You are a wonderful listener, and what a gift that is. So thank you. And thank you for digging into the work, and actually for the sticky notes,
No,
and the
it's
not just giving lip service
no,
to it.
really.
To
People
yes.
buy this book, and it truly will help you, but ultimately, it's going to help, really, really help a lot of students,
Agreed.
and your colleagues as well. And so, again, thanks for joining me, my friend, and we hope to talk to you very soon.
Oh yeah. Well, we hope to see each other in person very soon. Yes. Yes. Thank you.